this is for all of us. It all comes back to awareness. If we can pay attention to what the result is when we're divisive, when we're angry, when we're short, and we can eat our humble pie and say, learn from that instead of, double down on it. This will help us all learn to work with fear, to work with anxiety, to work with and not spread panic through social contagion. So here, simple practices like grounding themselves in awareness of their feet. Like that simple practice can help people move from getting stuck in their head, which is spinning, to literally grounding their awareness in the physical sensations of their body. They can also do things if they have access to nature or a window. They can simply look out a window and ground themselves in the present moment by looking at a tree or looking at a bird or something like that. I don't know anybody that gets more anxious when they're in nature or looking at nature, and we don't hold anxiety in our feet. So those are really simple, 30-second practices that we can do. And importantly, we can do these short moments throughout the day. That's actually how you set good habits.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs, sharing our vulnerability, overcoming our fears, transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Judson Brewer, the American author, psychiatrist, and behavioral neuroscientist. You are the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center and a research affiliate in the Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at MIT. Right now, the world is gripped by the COVID-19 pandemic and global lockdown, with over 1 billion people confined to their homes in order to stop spreading the deadly coronavirus. Economic recession is all but certain, and personal anxiety and panic is running high. You specialize in helping people process their fear response and give practical advice to keep our minds from going out of control. You've trained U.S. Olympic athletes and coaches, government ministers, and corporate leaders, and your work has appeared on 60 Minutes, Forbes, and CNN. Dr. Brewer, welcome to London Real.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Just to update us all on what the stats are, the last time I checked, we've got over 540,000 cases of the virus, over 24,000 deaths in 200 countries, over 1 billion people on lockdown now, stock market's down 30%, and a pending global recession. I guess we're here to ask you, how do we deal with this anxiety? And maybe we even start earlier than that. What is anxiety? And doctor, why are we seeing so many people, I guess, behave in so many strange ways?
Yeah, there's lots that we can unpack. Maybe we can just start with some very basic understanding of like how our minds work and how our brains work. So I think it's really important for people to understand that fear responses are normal, they're healthy, and they are adaptive. They help us survive. So, if you walked out into the street and you almost got hit by a car, you jump back onto the curb, and that fear response would say, hey, remember, don't do that again in the future. And so we learn, next time I walk to a street, I should look both ways. And there's actually a very simple process called reward-based learning or reinforcement learning that has 3 key elements: a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. The trigger would be you walk up to the street. The behavior would be that you look both ways. And then the reward is that you survive. So you don't get hit by a car. So that's an example of a very standard and basic fear response. Now, that's an old brain system, like survival brain. On top of that old brain, we've layered this new neocortex, this new part of the brain. And that brain is involved in planning and thinking. Now, planning and thinking are both very, very helpful, especially for us these days. We need to plan what we're going to do today, what we're going to do next week. But it's really important to understand that the key element for that thinking part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex, is information. We need accurate information because that prefrontal cortex, it has to simulate what it's going to do in order to plan. And right now, we don't have a ton of accurate information. It's starting to come online, but there's not a lot right now, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of anxiety.
Wow, and I see it everywhere. In fact, sometimes it seems the anxiety is more dangerous than the virus. And I know you've talked about how there's kind of these two viruses going on. There's the biological one and this social virus. Can you maybe explain your thoughts on that? Because very few of us as a percentage of the population will probably contract this. And yet, I think it's safe to say all of us right now are being affected by the virus in a social way, right?
Yes, there's a thing called social contagion, which is basically just the spread of affect or emotion from one person to another. A simple example of that would be, somebody calls a friend because they're a little bit nervous. They can actually spread that nervousness or fear to the friend. If they go on social media and they see a bunch of people panicking, they could panic as well. The reason that this is so dangerous is that, you can prevent the spread of a physical virus by staying isolated from people, not coming into physical contact. But you could spread a social virus anywhere in the world. Anybody can sneeze on your brain from, halfway across the world. So the more we go on social media and are, especially exposed to people freaking out, the more we're walking into brain sneezes, basically. Now, on the other side is we can also spread the opposite, kind of Purell for the brain or hand sanitizer for the brain by spreading words of, confidence, hope, and also accurate information in the same way. So it's not all just a negative thing. Social contagion can be both helpful and not so helpful.
Yeah, and like social contagion is real. And I think you talked about kind of previous stock market crashes and other kind of human panics that can just spread on information or sometimes misinformation and can change the whole game. And I think we're seeing signs of that. I think when our political leaders communicate to us sometimes there's like a message and then maybe a subtle message because it feels like they're trying to keep everyone calm and yet also get us information at the same time. But maybe that also makes people panic more because they feel like they don't think they're getting the truth. And then maybe people are even digging deeper, right?
I think you touched on something really important. So again, our thinking brains need accurate information, and we need to be able to trust our political leaders and anybody giving us information. If we can't, the best way to keep people calm, honestly, is just to be honest and give the most accurate information. So anytime we start to sniff that, people are, giving us a line that's, that may not be true, it's going to be much harder to keep our confidence and keep us from, not trusting those sources. So, if you look at sources like the WHO, they are very even. They don't necessarily try to put out sensationalist type news, but they will be very clean and clear on like what is actually true. And those are sources that we actually can go to and trust. And when we look at those, that actually, even if the numbers don't look great, it at least gives us some confidence in that this is accurate. And again, that's what our brains are looking for: accurate information. Tell us the truth, even if it's not stuff that we necessarily want to hear, because we're going to have to hear it at some point.
Right, because you said before, fear plus uncertainty equals the anxiety. If you can take away the uncertainty, you can lower the anxiety.
Yeah, and then that fear response can be adaptive and we can learn.
Okay, and I want to get into that too. Talk to me about social media hygiene. Obviously, everyone's talking about washing their hands. It's really funny, doctor. My young boys, 3 and 4 years old, they're actually walking around singing these washing their hands songs that they learned in preschool, like before it was closed down. So they're getting that drilled into their heads. And as adults, we're spraying the Purell. We're keeping our 2-meter distance over here in the UK. And yet, most people have horrible social media hygiene. And they're getting on and buying into all this sensationalist stuff, the social media and everything. What's a great habit that we can suggest to people right now in order to keep that hygiene when it comes to getting the news? Because you want some information, but you don't want too much, right?
Yes. So this is, and I put a short YouTube video out about this on my YouTube channel. So if people want to dive in more, they can look there. But I think it's important to understand how, how this process takes place in the first place, so that we can actually understand it and then be able to work with it. So I'll give you a brief thing on that and then what to do. So you can think of the stickiest, I guess, or the most reinforcing type of learning is called intermittent reinforcement. This is what's used at the casinos. So if if you pulled on the slot machine and you won every time, not only would the casinos lose, but it wouldn't actually be that exciting of we wouldn't be like, oh, let's go gamble, because we know exactly what's going to happen, right? We could predict. So the casinos have set up these intermittent reinforcement schedules, which is basically a fancy term for getting random rewards. You don't know when you're going to win, but they actually can dial in a formula to do that. Now, the news is interesting because right now it is the same. It's the same thing. So if you go on the news, if you haven't gone on the news, say in 12 hours, and you go on the news, there's invariably something big that hits. And so you go on the news and you say, whoa, I can't believe it, and you get this big dopamine hit in your brain. That's like winning the jackpot at the casino. Then you say, oh, I want to play again. And you check the news 5 minutes later. Well, it hasn't changed in 5 minutes. And then you check it 5 minutes later and 5 minutes later and 5 minutes later. And at some point, another big piece of news is going to hit. Well, guess what? You've just, set up your brain to treat the news like a casino. So if we can understand that, that helps us start to step back from the process. And simple ways that we can do that are to just limit ourselves from checking the news. Say right now, I would say every, two times a day, if you can, 3 at most, because you're going to get the information that you need. Most of us don't need, news every hour because it's not going to tremendously affect our lives. But if we go on twice a day, we're going to invariably get some big news hit, and we're going to be able to expect, okay, there's going to be big news that hits right now. And then our brain, it gets this regular reinforcement schedule. Importantly, we'll need to start to dial that back as the news becomes less, as we get fewer big stories coming out, because hopefully as this dies down, there won't be a big headline on the news every 12 hours or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And you've also said to maybe go to a site like the WHO where you're getting just the facts, ma'am, like just the figures, as opposed to go to, a major media site, or even worse, maybe a minor media site where you're going to get maybe a completely sensationalist take on it. And let's be honest, they make money with clicks. I had one of my guests on one time, James Altucher, who said he used to work in a newsroom, and he said, Brian, it's like Halloween every day. They're trying to scare you with the latest thing. So you have to be careful that that's their agenda, even at some of the most reputable places. If it bleeds, it does lead to a certain extent. Is that right?
That's absolutely true. This is, in modern times, we now have access to metrics. You can even look at the biggest news sources, the most reputable ones. There's this thing called the newspaper. Maybe you remember what it is. It's a paper, and it was delivered to our door. They couldn't actually track what stories people read when they read them in their homes. And so what they were incentivized to do was to put out the best news and the most accurate news and trust that people would, read the newspaper. Well, now on every single major news site, they can track exactly how many reads each article gets. And some sources incentivize their writers based on how popular their articles are. So you can think of it both within news organizations and then between news organizations, that they're competing for our attention. And they can look at metrics, and they can dive into the data more than they've ever been able to before. So news has moved from, let's just tell you what's going on and not be sensationalist, to, if it bleeds, it reads. And that's an unfortunate reality that's probably not going to go away. It's just something that we need to know about.
Yeah, I saw this like last week with the New York Times, where at one point the stock markets were down 9%, which is a massive move. And it showed it on the front page, S&P 500, Dow Jones down 9%, and it was right there. And then the next day, there was a small article a little bit below that where it said stock markets rally, no percentages, no nothing. And I clicked in, and they were up 9%. And I thought, why isn't that on the front page? because it's good news, and the good news isn't leading, it's not bleeding. And I thought, okay, this is what's happening. And so I think what a lot of people are finding right now is they are getting addicted to the media and getting addicted to the fear. And just, you must see this, they're isolated, they got more time on their hands. It masks itself as being connected and informed, but it turns into like this dopamine hit, like you said, and we have to be careful of that, right?
We do, especially because the dopamine hits can make it challenging for us to actually think clearly. You know, when it's just like somebody, you know, I have an addiction clinic, and when my patients are really jonesing for whatever their fix is, it's really hard for them to think straight. And if we're just, you know, clicking for news, it's hard for us to actually think straight in those moments.
Okay, so prescription for people, just, you know, I mean, I actually have an academy, and I put people on what I call a low media diet when I go through one of my programs. And I restrict them actually to an hour a day. And it's something I got from Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week back in the day. And so do you say to people just like 3 times a day, is that all you're allowed to check the news, and otherwise focus on things you can control, focus on the people around you? Is there a way to prescribe this?
Yes. So if I had a prescription pad that I would write out for people, and I actually do this myself, I've titrated. I used to be really addicted to checking the news when I didn't want to write papers or whatever. So I started restricting myself to checking the news twice a day. And then I now have 2 main sites that I look at, and I check each of them once a day. And when I check it, I'm done. So I can check it whenever I want during the day, but when I've checked it once, I'm done. So I'd recommend for people to pick a news source, hopefully a reputable one, hopefully one that's not sensationalist, and set yourself to twice a day, or pick 2 news sources so that you can, you know, diversify your news portfolio, and check each of them once a day. You know, and find something like that works. Don't do it more than that, because it's really hard to remember, and then your brain's going to sneak up on you and say, oh no, we only checked it once today, or we only checked it twice a day. You have one more time. So our brains are pretty sneaky this way. I would keep it really simple, and really we don't need to check the news more than twice a day, most of us.
So I've been like having conversations with my wife every night, and I'm just, you know, I'm trying to be the voice of reason, you know, and I'm trying to be calm. And that's what I think a leader needs to do in these times. And I'm trying to be logical. But sometimes I'm telling her these things. I'm like, darling, just let's focus on what we can control. Let's look at the numbers. Let's be realistic about this. And sometimes she looks at me like I'm speaking Swahili, right? And she's like, okay, great. But my brain isn't working like that right now. I'm in this sense of fear, anxiety that soon is going to turn into panic. So if someone is out there feeling that right now, what is some things they can do to interrupt that pattern?
Yeah, and we should probably talk about worry a little bit, because that can be a piece here. But let's start with your question. What I find, and my lab studies mindfulness training, for example, as a way to help people not be anxious. You know, we just finished 2 clinical studies with an app-based mindfulness training program where we found 57% reduction in anxiety symptoms in anxious physicians, and 63% reduction in people with generalized anxiety disorder. So we know there's an evidence base behind some very, very simple practices. And mindfulness might seem like some woo-woo thing, or not understandable, but basically it's about helping us, one, understand our mind. So we've already been doing that today. You know, if we can see these habit patterns that get formed around news or whatever, we can start to just understand, oh, this is what my brain's doing. And that's really helpful. The second thing that we can do is just simply ground ourselves. So for example, taking a few deep and conscious breaths where we're really paying attention to what the in-breath feels like, what it feels like as we're breathing out, that can literally calm our physiology. I find some people struggle with, you know, paying attention to their breath because they hold anxiety in their chest area. So here, simple practices like grounding themselves in awareness of their feet, like that simple practice can help people move from getting stuck in their head, which is spinning, to literally grounding their awareness in the physical sensations of their body. They can also do things if they have access to nature or a window. They can simply look out a window and ground themselves in the present moment by looking at a tree or looking at a bird or something like that. I don't know anybody that gets more anxious when they're in nature or looking at nature, and we don't hold anxiety in our feet. So those are really simple, 30-second practices that we can do. And importantly, we can do these short moments throughout the day. That's actually how you set good habits.
What about taking off your shoes? Is that a great way to focus on concentrating with your feet in the ground?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a great way to do it. It really, it feels like there's nothing preventing us from really feeling the ground, so to speak.
And you can't hold anxiety in your feet. So almost by definition, it's going to break any type of worry, anxious pattern you're having in your brain immediately if you do something like that.
It certainly can help. It can go a long way toward moving us out of that. Now, it doesn't mean that we're never going to get anxious again or it's not going to come back. But the more we practice that and the more we can learn, how our minds are working, the more we'll be able to work with them.
And you said also the hands can be a good thing. What can we do with our hands to ground ourselves in our hands?
Yeah. So here, I love, there's this curiosity, I think, of as a superpower. And we can talk about how that kind of hacks some of our reward-based learning systems in our brain in a minute. But basically what somebody could do with their hands is they could just put their hands on their leg or in their laps and not with their hands not touching. You could even do this now with me. And then just get curious, which hand feels warmer right now? Is it my right hand or my left hand? So which of your hands feels warmer, or do they feel exactly?
I think it's my right hand, but I know what you're doing to me right now, and it still's working. So I think it's my right hand. But
and what am I doing to you?
You got me. I'm not thinking about anything else except my right hand.
Yeah. So that's curiosity, and so I think of this mantra. We taught this to the Olympic women's water polo team, where it's like, what's happening? And that drops us into our direct experience rather than getting caught up in, oh no, what's happening? And honestly, curiosity feels so much better than anxiety.
And you talk about curiosity, kindness, and then this concept of this bigger, better offer. Maybe you can walk us through this and it's interesting, Doctor, because you see a lot of people with mantras that kind of reinforce this stuff. And you see people tending to do these behaviors, but they often don't know why they're doing it, right? So I go to help someone. In Britain, we have the phrase, keep calm and carry on, right? And, we've been through some stuff over here. And so there's a history, say in 1940 when bombs are dropping, where, there was a mantra for the population before we maybe even knew all the detailed fMRI studies that this was the right thing to do. So there's the wives' tales, there's the old history of what to do, but maybe we didn't know the science behind it. So what is this whole thing about curiosity and kindness? And then what is the BBO?
Yeah, so I think of the bigger, better offer as hacking the very basic reward-based learning systems in our brain. So our brain actually stores a hierarchy of reward values based on how rewarding a behavior is, so that we can make decisions really quickly without having to relearn everything that we do. This is how habits get formed. Imagine waking up in the morning and having to relearn everything from walking to putting on your clothes to talking to making your breakfast to making your coffee. We'd be exhausted by breakfast. So here we need to, I think of this as set and forget. We have to set the reward value of a habit and forget about the details. A good example would be eating cake. Okay, so we tend to learn the reward value of cake when we're kids, and we associate not just the taste of cake, not just the caloric value, but the friends, the party, the fun, the presents, and all of that stuff. And every time we go to a party, that reinforces that reward value. When we are older and adults, we can't just eat cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner like we probably could when we had a super strong metabolism as a kid. So we wonder, why can't I stop eating cake? And the same thing, can be true for many other things. So that reward value is still playing out in modern day. And so when our brains look at cake versus broccoli, of course they're going to say, well, I'd rather have cake. So here we need to do two things, is to help our brains see how unrewarding whatever the habitual behavior is that we're doing. So let's say we're checking the news all the time. And we check the news, and there's no new news, and it also makes us restless because it's like, oh man, I didn't win. I need to play again. right? So we can notice, what do I get from checking the news all the time? I'm disconnected with my family. I'm not getting my work done. There are a bunch of things that don't, and it just doesn't feel that great. Same thing is true when we eat 3 pieces of cake. If we eat cake when we're stressed, it doesn't actually feel that good. So here we can bring awareness in and really pay attention to the results of the behavior. That's how reinforcement learning works. It's based on how rewarding a behavior is, not the behavior itself. So if we can see, checking the news or eating a bunch of cake when I'm stressed out or anxious isn't actually that rewarding, that opens up the door for this BBO, for the bigger, better offer. And then we can bring something better in, because our brain's going to say, well, what you got? I'm realizing the cake isn't that great when I'm stress eating and all of this. What do you got for me? And here we can actually turn to things that are already available in us. They are calorie free and they don't actually engender these habit loops. So for example, curiosity. In our Unwinding Anxiety app, we had somebody describe, she had panic disorder, I think. And she was saying how she had formed the habit of being curious about the physical sensations when she was anxious and panicked, rather than getting sucked into the panic itself. And she said, something like, my automatic response is, that's interesting, right? Bringing in that curiosity, where she could feel into her sensations and notice these were just physical sensations. And she said, it just took the wind right out of its sails. I wasn't just thinking it was interesting. I actually felt it. And so that's what this bigger, better offer of like curiosity is. We can see parallels with these bigger, better offers in terms of, being divided versus connected. I see so many people working together and helping each other. It is that kindness, that generosity, that collaboration is infectious itself, because it is a bigger, better offer. When we all work together, then we're gonna all do much better individually, and it just feels so much better than fighting with each other. So one of my hopes is that as we come out the other end of this pandemic, is that people start to see that working together is just absolutely so much better than fighting with each other, and hopefully some of that will stick as well.
Question on the curiosity. Do you have to be curious about your own behavior, or can you just get curious about something? Can you just say, I'm checking the news, I'm checking the news, I'm checking the news, and I feel horrible. Can I just go try to learn a magic trick for curiosity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's really about paying attention to our own internal experience, because that's what drives behavior. So if we go and do something, like try to learn a magic trick or something like that, often we are distracting ourselves from what's actually happening as compared to learning to work with it. There's this phrase, maybe you know it. It's called, what is it? The only way out is through. Have you heard that one?
I have. What does it mean?
So the only way out is through, meaning, the only way out of anxiety, for example, is actually through, meaning we can't distract ourselves. We can't just go on YouTube and look at cute pictures of puppies, because our brains become habituated, and then they're not, they say, okay, I need puppies and kittens. Okay. More. Here we have to actually learn to accept that we're having these sensations. Okay, here's anxiety. Can I be with this? And then turn toward it. That's the through. And see, as we turn toward these sensations, that these are just thoughts. These are just emotions. These are just body sensations that seem really big and bad and horrible. But in fact, when we unpack them into their component elements, like moment to moment, anxiety might feel like heat or tightness or sinking or tension or agitation or restlessness. Well, none of those by themselves is going to make our head explode. But when we think, oh no, I'm anxious, then we just freak out and we can't think. And then things spiral out of control. So really bringing it back to its basic elements, that through is turning toward rather than avoiding. And it makes sense that we would avoid, because it's unpleasant, and our natural response is to run away from anything that's dangerous. But here we need to realize that our bodies, our sensations, our emotions are not dangerous. They're actually, potentially trying to teach us something, right? If we can actually get to that fear response. At those moments, if we can not be anxious, get our thinking brain back online, we can learn from those fear responses rather than having them spiral into anxiety and then panic.
Wow, that's really fascinating stuff. So I suffered from alcoholism and drug addiction for a long time. And I think what happened is that I wasn't curious about the feelings I was having. that caused me to use those substances to numb myself. So I would just get those feelings. They weren't necessarily anxiety, but whatever it was. And as opposed to being curious about them and maybe trying to understand their root and change that behavior, I just would mask them by, at that time, my better offer was a drink or something. And the problem with that loop is, like you said, I never went through it. So it just repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated.
Yeah, I have a number of patients in my clinic who have turned to alcohol for anxiety specifically. And they learn, I'm thinking of a patient right now who was drinking 6 to 8 drinks a night. And it was all because he was trying to avoid or escape from his anxiety. So we first had him map out his habit loops around that. And he realized that he was drinking in order to get rid of his anxiety, but it was just making things worse. His health was bad, all the bad things that come from drinking a bunch every day. And he was able to quit drinking just from seeing that, and also learn to work with the root cause of that drinking, which was his anxiety. And so, if we can see that these are Band-Aids, whatever we're turning to, whether it's alcohol or ice cream or cake or social media, that these are just Band-Aids that might actually just be perpetuating the processes, then we can step out of those. And we can also learn that we can relate to whatever the underlying issue is probably much more easily. And it sounds like, I certainly see this a lot in my clinic, that can be extremely helpful.
Is the bigger, better offer always kindness? Is that always just usually a big win for people if they go there, or are there other bigger, better offers?
It depends on what ails them. So, for example, if somebody I see a lot of self-judgment in my clinic and in my app-based training programs, where, especially around eating, we have this Eat Right Now app where a lot of people come because they're overeating, and they really are judging themselves every day, every time they look in the mirror. So if they can step out of, and see that they're judging themselves and that judgment doesn't actually feel very good, they can also then learn, when I'm kind to myself, it feels better. And they can use that as a way to step out. So if there's self-judgment, if there's anger, if there are things like that, that's where the kindness is the bigger, better offer. If there are things like, if there are other issues where we're getting stuck in something else, curiosity might be that bigger, better offer. So there are a number of bigger, better offers. And I see them as, we can develop personalized medicine in that sense and see, okay, what is it that I'm struggling with? What's my old habit? And what do I really need right now? So if it's self-judgment, the treatment would be kindness. If it's really struggling with the feelings of anxiety, it might be curiosity.
I'm having flashbacks. I was in New York City for September 11th. And so it's a very similar thing that was going on right now. There's a lot of fear. A lot of people forget we were expecting follow-on attacks. So it wasn't just dealing with a lot of mess and a lot of depression and sadness, but it was also the fear of what was coming next. And, as we saw for the first time ever, the Manhattanites, who are a notoriously callous crew, started banding together and putting American flags up and being super kind to each other. So as humans, we tend to figure this behavior out sometimes on our own, but it's nice to have this real prescription from you to say, you know what, you can do this intentionally today and go into this kindness aspect, right?
Right. And all we need to do is really see how much better kindness feels, how much better it feels to be connected, to be kind, than it does, to be disconnected and nasty to each other. Tensions are running high right now. And so I think another piece here is, if somebody snaps at us, instead of just snapping right back, stepping back and saying, okay, everybody's on edge right now. I'm not going to take this personally. And then maybe have that thinking brain come back online and say, oh, this person might need something, what can I do to help? And then that kindness naturally kicks in.
Yeah, you mentioned the mindfulness earlier. Like, I'm sticking to my, 20 minutes every morning like I always do. And I think it's definitely helping me just view myself as opposed to just being in my thoughts and a product of my thoughts. If people don't have that mindfulness or meditation practice, are you asking them to start now? Is there a way they can kind of maybe start without going all the way into it? Because some people think they can't meditate. What do you tell people when it comes to that?
Yeah, well, I'm smiling for two reasons. One is I spent many years thinking that I couldn't meditate. I'd sweat through t-shirts in the middle of long silent meditation retreats. I'd been able to get into medical school, but I couldn't get my brain to stop thinking and to concentrate. I cried on the shoulder of a retreat manager one time thinking I was a failure. So the other thing I'm smiling about is we learned something really interesting from one of our clinical studies with mindfulness training for smoking, where my hypothesis was that these formal meditation practices like you're describing would be the thing that helped people quit smoking. In this study, we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment for smoking, first off. So it worked gangbusters. And when we started to look at the mechanism, we found that these formal practices, think of it as formal as like sitting down to do meditation or whatever, they did correlate with outcomes, but not nearly as much as what we called informal practices, where people were practicing in the moment. And I had a big aha moment there where I realized, this reward-based learning is set up to help us learn things in context, right? It helps us remember where food is. It helps us remember where danger is, so we can go to the food and avoid the danger. And I realized people don't learn to smoke in my office. So could we actually, package this training and deliver it to them in context? And in context means people are, they're getting in their car and they have a craving to smoke a cigarette because they've associated smoking with driving. So in those moments, that's when they need these practices. And so we took a playbook from some ancient philosophy around short moments many times, like using mindfulness practice throughout the day in people's daily lives. And in fact, that was what drove the effect of this smoking cessation program more than anything else. So what I would recommend for folks, certainly if folks can sit and meditate, for in the morning, or do prayer or do yoga or whatever it is that helps to ground them, that lowers the baseline. So whenever they, something invariably is going to happen throughout the day, their anxiety is going to spike a little bit, whether it's the news or somebody yelling at them or whatever. They won't hit that red line where they start to panic or freak out or add to it if they've got a really nice grounding. What we can also do throughout the day is just to take short moments where we work that down. And the way we can do that is to simply pause, take a moment to ground ourselves in our feet. Do that repeatedly throughout the day. We can also do this, if people are struggling with eating habit loops, they can take a moment to really pay attention as they eat, because they have to eat anyway. And so they're not taking any extra time to do that. If they pay attention as they eat, they can actually see, is this nourishing me, right? What am I eating? Is it healthy? Is it junk food? Am I eating it really quickly, just to get it down? And, and why am I eating it? Am I eating it because I'm stressed out, or am I actually hungry? We just
call that mindful eating, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We just finished a clinical study actually we have this Eat Right Now app where we have an exercise in the app to help people pay attention first as they're about to eat, and then we have them eat mindfully. And we find if they do this, they can do this as few as 10 to 12 times, and it significantly reduces the reward value of, if they're stress eating or overeating, it reduces that reward value significantly and can predict future behavior. So it doesn't take a whole lot, but it does take, bringing awareness in whenever we're about to check the news, or whenever we're about to stress eat, or whenever we're getting caught up in worry. And that can actually significantly reduce that, that reward value of the old behavior. And that opens that door for what we were talking about, these bigger, better offers. So they can replace these simply by being aware already and noticing these habit loops, but bring in curiosity, bring in kindness, and whatever's needed.
Right. And the big ones right now in this current environment are probably going to be checking the news, eating, drinking, or maybe getting angry at people. Like, those are probably very standard triggers people are going with. And if they can just take themselves out and say, okay, why am I doing this behavior right now? Let me be mindful about this practice. Do I need to do this? Be curious about it, and then maybe replace it with a kindness instead.
Yes. And I would add to that, one of the biggest things that I'm also seeing is worry. So worry is a unique beast in several ways. One is when we were studying our eating program, people were saying, oh, I'm actually eating because I'm anxious. And I started to look to see if anxiety could actually be perpetuated in the same habitual way as eating. And in fact, there's a lot of research showing this that goes back to the 80s. So in essence, a negative emotion like fear or anxiety can trigger worry as a mental behavior. So it's not just physical behaviors that can perpetuate these things, mental behaviors as well. And that worry would do two things. One, help people feel like they're in control because they are actually doing something. And two, it would distract them from that worst feeling emotion of fear or anxiety itself. So worry can get perpetuated as a negatively reinforced habit loop in the same way that eating or smoking can. And in fact, the worry starts to spiral out of control because worry itself doesn't feel good and it doesn't fix anything. So just doing something isn't necessarily doing something helpful. In psychiatry training, what we learned this phrase, don't just do something, sit there. And the idea was when we're about to reach out with I'm going to give you a great interpretation, it was either about us thinking we had a great interpretation, or it was because we're bumbling around and we don't know what's going on. And so we're going to say something, and generally saying something equals inserting foot in mouth. And so another phrase that was applicable there was, the more you say, the less you know. And that's where the don't just do something, or in psychiatry, don't just say something, sit there. And so it can be really important for us if we have the urge to do something, whether it's spun out by worry or that doing is worrying itself, to first ask, is this pointing me in the right direction? Now, if we're going to do something and it is helping, connect us or disseminate accurate information or whatever, great. But if we don't step back and look, we might be doing something that's actually making things worse. And that's really important to recognize.
And most people are probably in a massive state of worry right now, worrying about family members around the world, worrying about all this stuff. And it could be overtaking them and changing their behavior. And does it get addictive, the worry, as well?
Yeah, it really does. So I think of my definition of addiction that I learned in residency was continued use despite adverse consequences. So if we are continuing to worry and we get on the phone with a family member, I've seen this. We get on the phone with a family member and say, hey, I'm worried about you. I want you to be safe. Well, worrying about them isn't going to make them safer physically. And our worry could become contagious to them where they're not going to be thinking clearly. They might be reactive, or they might get freaked out themselves and not be able to keep their thinking brain online to do the things that keep them safe.
Talk to me about isolation, because this is a whole nother ballgame that people, they just can't be used to. And the funny thing is, doctor, is that I've had a few prisoners on my show, and I had one on recently who spent 10 years in the California penal system, including 14 months in his jail cell without ever coming out. And for him, he's done this before, and so he's putting out lots of advice and thoughts on this, but most of us haven't. What do we need to know about isolation, and what do we need to know about how we can deal with it without freaking out?
That's the scientific term. I use that one as well. We're freaking out. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One is humans are social creatures by and large, some outliers there, but generally, we are social creatures. So not being able to interact with each other is really tough. That's why solitary confinement is the strictest and most tortuous, in my opinion, thing that prisons use, because, solitary confinement really breaks the psyche. So the second thing to keep in mind, I'm thinking of a study that was published about 5 years ago where this research group gave people 15 minutes alone in a room by themselves. And so they took away all their social media, they took away all their technology, and just said, sit with yourself, see what that's like. And people thought it was terrible. There was one part of the experiment where people chose to shock themselves when given the choice. They'd rather shock themselves than be alone with themselves. So what that points to is that when we don't know how our minds work, when we haven't trained our minds, it's really hard to be with ourselves because we're addicted to distraction. Basically, I wrote a chapter about that in my book. We're literally addicted to distraction. So it's just like taking away anybody's drug of choice. Of course, we're going to go into withdrawal. Now, the good news is if we can see how this works, we can actually use this in ways where we can still connect with others, and we can also not freak out in the process. So look at folks like Nelson Mandela, right? A beautiful example of being imprisoned for, I don't know how many years, decades, right?
Yeah, 27.
So what did he do? He didn't freak out. It didn't break his spirit. He only got stronger. And we see this with many people who actually have the grounding to be able to be with themselves. He made that time very, very productive. And so folks can actually practice things. If they're alone, it's a great time to learn to meditate. There are great online resources. There are books. There are guided meditation. Why not learn to be with yourself now? Because this is one of the rare opportunities people are going to get where they're actually alone. So if it's kind of, if it's kind of forced, and it's really important that we all really socially isolate right now, that's the only way we're going to flatten these curves. So if we're doing this as a public service, we can start to actually play with, what's it like to be with myself? I've not actually done this before. Because we're going cold turkey. We're quitting interaction cold turkey. And we can also titrate that by getting on the phone with somebody, getting on video with somebody. Video is really helpful because facial expression and body language actually conveys more information than words do. So if folks can connect via technology, great. But when they are alone, great opportunity to learn about themselves. Who doesn't want to know more about themselves?
All right. So use this time to invest in yourself. Don't use this time to freak out about being alone.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the bottom line.
And use the video, because that's a way that we didn't have necessarily 20 years ago, where you can at least simulate it. And like you said, body language, facial expressions, that's what we crave. So understand that you should pull video into your life and make sure you can see people's faces and bodies, because that's going to give us something to tide us over, almost kind of food to keep us going. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So don't just go cold turkey and call people on the phone and just say, I'm going to go solitary confinement for the next 3 weeks and see how hard I can be. That's probably not a good idea.
No, that's akin to saying, I'm going to go torture myself for 3 weeks. Doesn't sound like a great idea to me.
Here at the studio, we're having regular Zoom calls throughout the day. We're treating it with the same structure where we would on a normal business day. And we've got a couple people here that are helping us broadcast. But it's interesting because a couple of them just they said to me, wow, being here is so different than being on Zoom or being plugged in on Slack. It's just, we can cover so much more in a minute or two of those communications than we could on 10 minutes on Zoom and 10 minutes on Slack. I guess that's because of these subtle emotional cues that we're getting all the time. Is that right?
That's part of it, but there's another part, and folks need to be honest with themselves. If they are going on Zoom or Slack or whatever, are they unitasking, as in, are they just paying attention to the person that they're talking to, or are they doing 4 other things at once because people can't see what they're doing? So what I would suggest to people is, if you're going to go on Zoom, just go on Zoom. Turn off your email, turn off your phone, and actually, because when you're in person with somebody, it's rude. But with Zoom, you can be fiddling around and nobody knows what you're doing, So that's a really important thing we need to be honest with ourselves with and say, okay, what's the best use of my time right now? Well, it's not spending 20 minutes on Zoom trying to talk to somebody because we're half paying attention. It's 5 minutes on Zoom, totally focused, totally dialed in. And as a bonus, that other person, we feel this connection where we're actually connecting, as compared to, everybody knows when somebody is not really paying attention.
Yeah, it's actually worse than actually talking to someone when they're not paying attention. I think Zoom has some tools now where they can tell when you're not paying attention, right?
Oh, really? I'll have to check those out.
I think they have eye tracking now that they can tell if you're looking at something else. Or I think they can know if you're actually moving your mouse or on another window or something, and they can call people out. So they're maybe ahead of the game. What if someone's actually having a panic attack? What if this anxiety and worry is culminating into some physical symptoms? What can they do about that? Because that's happening out there, isn't it?
It is. And so some of the simple things that I mentioned earlier are great ways to help people ground. And I'll give an example. when I was in residency, I was having panic attacks, which is ironic because I was learning about panic at the time that I was actually having panic attacks. And what I found was that a simple practice of the meditation that I've been learning was really helpful. And it was I actually teach this to some of my veterans in my clinic, which takes 5 minutes, where we simply pay attention to whatever sensations we're having. So seeing, any of our five senses: seeing, hearing, feeling, thinking. So thinking, I'll include in that, tasting, etc. So in any moment that we're having a panic attack, we can simply notice, okay, tightness in my chest. We can notice, shortness of breath, heart racing, things like that. And we can ground ourselves moment to moment in that present experience. And in that experience, we can start to see, oh, this is just this, and this. And that helps us ride out the panic attack. Most importantly, panic disorder only comes when we start to worry about having panic attacks in the future. So the more we can start to notice, okay, I'm worrying about having another panic attack later, the more we can actually prophylactically not get caught up in them later.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to ask you about was we saw a lot of the hoarding going on out there. And I was wondering, first of all, where does that behavior come from? And how can we talk about that and think about that so that doesn't happen in the future? Because it can, first of all, it can be very alienated. It can upset people, but it can also be a little bit dangerous. Why do we see that happening? And of course, we saw it with the toilet roll, which was just weird. Maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, I think the toilet paper was just a meme that happened, and then that exploded on social media. So if we go to the grocery store with a plan, we've got our list of things to buy. That's our thinking brain that's online doing what it's supposed to be doing. If suddenly we see somebody buying up all the toilet paper or all the milk or whatever, our scarcity mode kicks in, and our brain says, oh, there's not enough. I need to rush and get something. So our thinking brain goes offline, and we rush and we try to get all the rest of the toilet paper just by seeing somebody else do it. And then somebody else sees us doing it, and suddenly there's no more toilet paper. There's no more milk, which is, this is really completely ridiculous, because especially with the perishable items, nobody's going to be able to drink all that milk before it goes bad if they buy all of it.
Right. So again, you mentioned a meme. I mean, I guess it is a bit of a meme, because you see one instance of something and then that gets repeated and then it feeds on itself, but it all comes back to that scarcity mindset. So check yourself when you're seeing that and saying, why am I feeling that way? Back to the curiosity and back to the better offer, maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? Just fear. We touched on it right in the beginning, but, I'd love to just ask you again about that. I mean, it's such a powerful emotion. It's something that stops us in our tracks, that gets us to behave, like you kind of said, without that prefrontal cortex, that amygdala or lizard brain it is called about. What can you say to people to help them understand that basic concept of fear? I mean, you mentioned before it was there to save us back in the day, but in this current day, most of us are afraid of things in a way that's life or death when it's not life or death. We've heard about public speaking, in other ways where it feels so carnal. How can people get their heads around that and process that?
Yeah. So after the fear response is over, so for example, if we've stepped out into the street and jumped back on the sidewalk, our instinctive, habitual brain is online and doing what it needs to do to save us. We're not thinking at the time, and actually thinking is orders of magnitude slower than those instincts. So the first thing there is to step back and make sure our thinking brain is back online so that we can think again. And then we can ask ourselves, okay, is this really a threat? And for most things, for many of us, most of us, hopefully, we're not actually under constant threat. Yet we can start to think that something terrible is happening, when we go on social media and all these things that keep our thinking brains offline. So it's important to be able to step back, ask ourselves, is this really dangerous? So that we can actually use the fear response in the way that it was intended.
Yeah, so powerful. Physical practice It's something that I've been really trying to force myself. It's been hard because they closed the gym down. But how does physical practice come into managing all of these mental stresses?
Yeah, exercise has been shown in a number of scientific studies to be really helpful for a ton of different physiologic things, just brain health, body health, mental health, everything. So here, just knowing that exercise is helpful is great. And there have been some recent studies showing that just getting a bunch of steps in, it doesn't need to be super intense, but going out for a walk can be really helpful. So if we can't do our 30-minute killer cardio workout, we're probably still going to reap quite a bit of benefits, both physically and mentally, if we just get outside and go for a walk for a bit. We can still socially distance if we don't go walking in groups, but go get your steps in. It could be as simple as taping a piece of tape on the floor and jumping back and forth over it, and that's a good aerobic workout. So there are many ways that we can be creative to to raise our heart rate, to get some exercise, to get our steps in at home. All we need is a 2x2 meter piece of floor and a piece of tape.
Yeah. How can we prepare ourselves for the future? I catch myself a lot of times lately saying to everyone here, my team and my family, look, things are going to get worse before they get better. We're going to see these numbers stack up. We know they're coming. And I say again to people, and that's going to be scary because the news media is the numbers are doubling, the numbers are up. We know they're going to double. How are you telling people to prepare for the next, say, 4 weeks when I think it's pretty safe to say the numbers are going to get worse before they get better?
Okay, I'm going to give you a paradox here,
Okay.
which is the best way to prepare for the next 4 weeks is to prepare for today. So again, if we try to look 4 weeks out, and if we're honest with ourselves, nobody in the world knows what 4 weeks from today is going to look like. Nobody can project into the future that far. We could do that a month ago, before or last year before the pandemic hit. We could generally predict, what the markets are going to look like, what the labor force is, all that stuff. We were doing a good job of that. But now this, something's a wrench has been thrown in the system. So the more we try to prepare for 4 weeks out, the more we're actually just going to, I think your term was, freak ourselves out. So that's not going to help us prepare for 4 weeks. It's not going to help us prepare for 2 weeks or even a week from today. So the best thing that I would recommend is for people to say, okay, what accurate information do I have that's actually actionable? And if I don't have it for 4 weeks out, dial it back to 2 weeks. Do I have actionable stuff for 2 weeks? If I don't, dial it back to a week. If I don't have it for a week, that's okay. I'll figure it out next week. Dial it back to today and figure out what can I do today that's going to help me stay physically and mentally healthy. What can I do today that's going to help flatten the curve, that's going to keep everybody else physically healthy? And start there. And even if today seems tough, start with half a day or an hour or a minute or just a moment, right? In this moment, I can check in. Do I need food or water? Sometimes we're not even paying attention to our physiologic needs, which then makes it harder for us to mentally take care of ourselves. At any one moment, if somebody pays attention, they can tell if they need food or drink or they need to take rest or whatever. They can start there, and that helps them be able to plan for the next moment and the next hour and then the rest of the day.
And we mentioned kindness earlier. I mean, what are some acts of kindness people can do right now? Because obviously we're not in touch with each other. You can't bring someone cookies per se. You can't hug them. Like, what are you seeing people do, or what are you recommending people to get that kindness in them?
I'm seeing so many acts of kindness on a personal level. We could spend an entire episode talking about the beauty of that. But I'm seeing therapists donating their time to help people who don't have access to a mental health worker. I'm even doing some of that myself. I'm doing a live YouTube thing once a week for anybody that has questions, about this. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing people help their neighbors out so that, if they have to go to the grocery store, they're asking their neighbors, do you need anything from the grocery store? So they can prevent, more people going out, and then they'll leave groceries on their neighbor's doorstep. So simple acts of kindness physically. And honestly, one of the biggest acts of kindness we can do for each other right now is to maintain our social distancing. Because just imagine, if you found out later that if somebody found out later that they were carrying the coronavirus asymptomatically and they spread it to somebody that was elderly and that person died, I couldn't live with myself. So one of the biggest acts of kindness that we can do for each other collectively right now is to maintain that social distancing and, let go of some of the things that we love to do, like going out and, hang out with people and this and that. My wife started doing happy hour with her friends on Zoom as a way to be kind to the world by not going and interacting personally, but she could still get that social interaction in. So if people go on social media, please see if you go on social media because you're anxious or afraid or angry. Don't go on social media. That's an act of kindness because you're likely to either catch more social contagion or spread it by getting reactive to somebody's social media post and then getting in a fight on Twitter in front of the whole world, right? Not helpful. And so there's an act of kindness to just practice restraint there.
Yeah, that's great words of advice. And it's funny, when I look at my behavior over the past week, it's like, for me, it's like, what can I control? Well, this is a time where, we can come in and have these conversations. We've never done these remote conversations before. And how can we put out information that can help people get through this stuff so we feel like we're doing this act of kindness? So I think we're running your playbook, Doctor, without knowing it. And it feels good. And it also feels like I'm focusing on what I can control. And it's nice to be able to control something in a time like this.
It is.
Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of us can control things, like you said, whether it's taking up that meditation practice and monitoring it, doing that physical practice, learning something, reaching out and being kind to people, connecting with other people. It's actually a great time to work on things you can control. But from the wrong lens, it looks like you're out of control. So it's just a way of how you can look at the world, and that can make the difference between anxiety and panic, or maybe calmness. And for some people, this will be a great period for them of building themselves and connecting with others, right?
Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all came out the other end where we understood our minds a little bit more, and we realized through that process how, only kindness makes sense anymore as compared to, divisiveness. Just those two things would be revolutionary for our planet.
I agree. And it's funny, I saw little tendencies of that. You see the Republicans and the Democrats complimenting each other on how well they're doing, and, governors getting along with the federal government. And I'm like, guys, don't you see how this could be? It's like, look, when you guys get along and think about us or the greater good, we like it, things get done. So yeah, I agree with you, Doctor. I hope we all take something from this and learn and look back at these times as something to teach us. Maybe this is what we needed in some way.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if our politicians remembered that they were elected to govern and help us, as compared to being stuck in their small, ways of just thinking about how they are going to get reelected or they are going to get some media attention? It's really about it's their privilege to help us. And I think that can get lost when there's a lot of bickering and fighting. So yes, hopefully they can remember what their job is, which is to help the world thrive and flourish and live, happily and healthfully, as compared to just getting reelected.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when they made the comments, like, we worked really hard together and we got this big bill passed. And it's like, that's what we want you to do.
Do that a lot more.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. And how are you holding in there? Are you enjoying putting this information out via video? I know your YouTube channel blown up a lot and people are asking you a lot of questions. Like, how are you doing this last week?
I have to say I've been inspired by seeing acts of kindness all around me. And so I've been waking up early, just naturally, before my alarm, because it just, there's just so much to try to be helpful with. I just did my first clinic yesterday virtually, with my patients, so we could all socially distance, and it actually worked. I like you were talking about earlier, it's much better to be able to sit face to face. But in the current reality, it still worked surprisingly well to just talk to them, by phone, and we'll be setting up video in the near future. So, Thank you for asking. I have to say, this is an opportunity for us as humans to really band together, and I've truly been inspired by all the acts of generosity and kindness that I've seen, to just be able to pitch in and do my little part.
Yeah, it's nice to see, and I'm in a city like London, and it's nice to see smiles and nods and people helping out, and nice to see our true nature coming out sometimes, And I've been super impressed with some of the people that have just really stepped up and made things happen. And the same with me. I can't sleep. I mean, I'm just getting up early, and I feel like we're all on a mission around here to put out this information, and I'm just glad we're able to do that. I'm glad that we have the platform to do that, and it feels good doing that. So, yeah,
There's
a lot
your
of
bigger, better
positives here.
offer.
Yeah, it is. My whole life has been discovering the bigger, better offer. I could talk your ear off about that, but that's another show. Final thoughts or anything we didn't cover, Doc?
I guess my final thoughts would be, this is for all of us. It all comes back to awareness. If we can pay attention to what the result is when we're divisive, when we're angry, when we're short, and we can eat our humble pie and learn from that instead of, double down on it. This will help us all learn to work with fear, to work with anxiety, to work with and not spread panic through social contagion. This will all help us all learn, that bigger, better offer of kindness is really the only thing that makes sense anymore. That's my one-liner.
I love it. I mean, and I've lived a whole life where in the end it was the kindness and the giving back that got me out of all of my self-destructive habits. So everything you're saying makes sense to me. It only took me 49 years to figure this out, Doctor. But I'm with you on all that. I love that stuff. How can people find your YouTube channel for those live broadcasts? How can they download your app, get to your website, etc.?
My YouTube channel is just Dr. Judd, D-R-J-U-D. My website's drjudd.com. And the websites for the apps, so the Unwinding Anxiety app was the one I talked most about. It's just unwindinganxiety.com. Our eating app is goeatrightnow.com. And the smoking one is Craving to Quit. I'm on Twitter at Judd Brewer, at JUDBREWER.
Love it. All right, everybody download all of those apps. I like the name of the eating app as well. It's good. That's great stuff. Well, thank you for this. And again, if anybody's watching this, just really try putting some of this stuff into practice. This wasn't meant as a piece of entertainment. This is meant as a piece of actionable information. So really go in there and do that. Again, I can't emphasize enough the mindfulness practice right now, the awareness of who you are, the default to kindness, using that Zoom stuff, and really being aware of your own consumption habits around the news, your own social media hygiene, super important right now. And look, we can see the people that are doing it right and doing it wrong. And we can see, and that's what great leadership is all about. And I see leadership in 10-year-olds and 80-year-olds, and I see leadership in someone who's not the boss because they're carrying themselves with that good energy. And I think we can all do that, Doctor, going forward. And it's going to make all of this really, it's going to make a better situation about what we're dealing with. Excellent. All right. Wishing you all the best. Thanks for doing everything you do. And for everybody here, just wishing you all the best as well. Put this stuff into practice. Keep calm and carry on as we stay here in Britain. And hopefully we'll see you in the studio sometime in the future, Doc.
I would love that.
All right, great. All the best to you and to everybody else here at London Real. You can get lots of other information about this stuff on our website, londonreal.tv. We're going to keep broadcasting all these messages, so follow us on Instagram and YouTube. And look, just put this stuff into practice. If you want to do one thing for us, be aware, be mindful, and go with that kindness. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.